as you start looking at the upsides, you center yourself and then you go, okay, now my current reality is this. How specifically do I take this current reality and now how do I fulfill my mission with it? That's being resourceful. And then when you realize that, I've now got resourcefulness, and this is a catalyst for me to go do something even more amazing in my life.
Welcome to a new season of Leadership Live podcast, where talented people become extraordinary leaders. I'm Daphne Horowitz, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and talk about real leadership issues. Down to earth, solid, caring and confident leadership. No theory, no pie in the sky, no frills or fluff. Because this is what the world needs most right now. For you to lead with confidence, clarity and impact so that you can build a business that builds people, grows profit and makes a difference. John Demartini's name and reputation speak volumes in themselves, so I don't think I can even do justice in terms of an introduction of John and this episode that we recorded together. He is well known to all of us who've delved into the world of personal development for many, many years. He's appeared in the movie The Secret, and he's a man on a mission. I feel incredibly fortunate and blessed to have had the opportunity to spend time with him today in our interview. This episode is a little bit longer than my usual, but it's definitely worth every minute. This conversation had a big impact on me and is filled with gold nuggets on how to look at life in general and leadership as well. The key idea that we spoke about, or the central idea, is about homeostasis, or being in an equilibrium state. A state of grace and gratitude, which is not about being at either extreme, either all puffed up and proud about our successes, and also not minimizing ourselves and being all low and down on ourselves when we fail, make mistakes, or feel low. Emotions are feedback for what we're missing in the whole picture. So the idea here is to get back to center and ask yourself, what am I not seeing while I'm in this state that is polar opposite to what I'm feeling right now? So for example, if I'm elated and happy and super excited, to pause for a moment and say, what am I missing in this picture that's on the other side of the spectrum, so that we can live in a state of grace, equilibrium and homeostasis. We go deep into this concept, so listen in to really understand more on this philosophy. And my favorite part was this tip, which is John shared. Ask yourself, what's most meaningful and important to you? These are your values, then act on them. Your emotions will be your feedback on your actions, and when you lead and act based on what's most meaningful and most important to you, you can take spontaneous action, and then you don't feel like everything is, I should do this, I have to do this, I need to do this. And we start to replace it with, I want to, I'm delighted to, I'm excited to do all of these things. So when we connect our actions to what is most meaningful to us and what is most important to us, the action just rolls off from there. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. So just dive into this episode and enjoy, as I did. And as always, for great leadership resources and information about our events and programs, head on to my website at daphneHorowitz.com or grab yourself a copy of my new book, Weekly Habits for Extraordinary Leaders, available on Amazon today. And while you're listening, if you enjoy this episode, please do share it with a friend, give us a rating and a review, and I'd be most grateful for that. Welcome, Dr. John Demartini. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for...
Yeah, I have to say that I'm a little bit starstruck because I think that I heard you speak, it was many years ago, it has to be about 15 years ago in South Africa, and you certainly have made an impact on me. You make an impact on thousands of people around the world, and I'm very appreciative of your work. So I really want to thank you for being here today in conversation with me about leadership.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity again. It's great.
I'd love to just start with a quick intro into who you are. I'm sure you need no introduction, but I'm just going to say a few things, and that is that you are the founder of the Demartini Institute. You're an author of 40 books that have been translated into 38 languages, as I said, impact around the world. And you are a human behavior specialist. And actually, what I'd like to start off with is, what are you most passionate about? What drives you to do the work that you do?
Well, I had a dream when I was 17 to overcome my learning problems, my learning challenges, because I had problems. I didn't read till I was 18.
Wow. Tell us a bit about that, because I know, even maybe take us a little bit further back.
Well, I was, when I was born, probably about a year and a half old, my parents found out that I had problems in my pronunciation and movement of mouth. I had to go to a speech pathologist. And I was also born with my arm and leg turned in. And so my hand was turned inward and my leg was turned in on the left side and had to be braces on the arm and leg.
Wow.
And so, a lot of kids don't know what to do with that. When you meet a kid with braces on, they kind of feel awkward talking to them and then pick on them and stuff. When I got to first grade, I was told that I was, by my first grade teacher who tried to teach me reading. Finally, she had my parents come there and said, look, I don't think he's going to be able to read or write properly. He's not going to be able to speak properly. I don't think he's going to go very far or amount to anything. But when I was 4, when I got out of my braces, I wanted to run. And so she said to my parents, put him into sports because he seems to excel running.
Wow.
Once my leg was straightened, all I wanted to do is prove to my dad that I could run.
Wow.
So I made it through elementary school with the help of the smartest kids by asking questions, which I do today. My life is really about questions. And they would give me enough information to make it through elementary school, but that didn't work when my parents moved from Houston, Texas to Richmond, Texas. We lived in the country in a small, kind of a low socioeconomic environment, and there weren't a lot of smart kids, and I didn't have smart kids to ask questions to, so I failed. And I dropped out of school. So I was a sort of a street kid from age 13 to almost 18. And I lived in locally first, and then I went out to California, hitchhiked to California when I was 14 and down to New Mexico. And then I made it to Hawaii at 15 because I wanted to go surfing because I could do a sport called surf. And Texas wasn't the surf capital.
But difficult to surf in Texas, right?
You got to have hurricanes. You got to go. And then when I was in Hawaii at 17, I was living in a tent. I socially climbed. I started under a bridge. I went to a park bench, went to a bathroom, went to a abandoned bar, and finally to a tent. And then I found myself nearly dying because I was poisoned, strychnine and cyanide poisoning. And luckily, a lady found me in my tent. I was unconscious. She found me in my tent and helped me recover, which led me to a health food store to eat differently, which led me to a little class on yoga to try to overcome my spasms that I had from the strychnine, which led me to meet Paul Bragg, who spoke one night to a group of us, about 35 of us sitting in a little wooden floor in a Sunset Recreation Hall. And he said that we have a body, we have a mind, and we have a soul. The body must be directed by the mind must be guided by the soul in order to maximize our potential. And that we are here to do something for ourselves, our family, our community, our city, our state, our nation, our world, and beyond for 120 years. And that what we think about, what we visualize, what we affirm to ourselves, what we feel about ourselves, and what actions we take determine what we can do in life. And after hearing him speak, nobody ever spoke to me like that. I thought something happened that night, and I kind of got an epiphany, I guess. And I thought maybe I could overcome my learning problems and learn to read someday. Maybe I could be intelligent after all.
Wow. So you never believed you were intelligent?
I never believed I was going to. I believed I was intelligent when it came to surfing.
Okay. Okay.
I could ride big waves. I rode 40-foot waves.
So that's a talent. That's a talent.
That's a talent.
Sure. Uh-huh.
I assumed I was going to make surfboards on the North Shore the rest of my life, kind of thing. That's where I thought I was going headed. But that night, I believed that maybe if I worked at it, maybe I could somehow overcome learning problems and learn how to read. Because I used to have to ask the guys in the tent and the guys around me to read for me.
Wow. So you actually couldn't read. Wow. You could not read.
I could limited words. I mean, I had some words, but it mainly what people say. You know, you pick up words for what people say, and you get it just like if you went into a foreign country and you picked up a few words in language kind of thing. But to really make sense out of things, more complex things, I just wasn't working. I don't think I was lacking intelligence. I think I just had dyslexia and a few things that just wasn't working.
So I'm wondering if at that time, was it your interpretation, I have a talent, I might be good at some things, but not at others, and this is where I'm going to focus? Or was there something in your own, you know, because I think sometimes when we hear messages drummed into us that we're not good at this, it makes us think that we might be stupid or we might be not intelligent enough. Did you ever have that kind of thinking? Or did you know I'm intelligent just in different things or in different ways?
I don't think I differentiated. I assumed intelligent was, you know, more academic kind of stuff.
Okay.
I was good and agile with playing baseball and surfing.
Okay.
Sports I could do. I was coordinated because I think I made an effort to really concentrate on using my arms and legs after being out of the braces. So I really developed a skill. But academics and reading wasn't it. So I don't think I was lacking intelligence because I was street smart. Yeah. And I knew how to survive on the streets. I knew where to get food and I knew how to survive. But I think that night I saw a vision, which is painted and sits in my office today, of me speaking in front of a group of people, large audience, like 1 million people. And I had a dream that night to overcome my learning problems, learn how to read, become intelligent enough to be able to teach. And I wanted to travel the world and teach. That's what I saw that night. And it seemed kind of...
Without having any previous thinking along those lines.
It was probably a dissociative identity disorder. I probably dissociated and went into fantasy.
Did you think, where did this vision come from? Like, where is this?
I had no idea. I think it was such a deep void.
Wow.
That it just surfaced. And it's painted in my office. Andrew Tischler from Melbourne, Australia, painted this magnificent painting in my office of the vision that I saw. And I look at it, and it's still...
Amazing.
Still inspired.
I can see. I love that. John, if we can pause for it, I can see how emotional you're getting. And I know our listeners can't see it, but it's just an amazing moment to capture.
I decided to leave Hawaii. I flew back to Los Angeles. I hitchhiked back to Texas. I took a GED with the help of my parents. You know, they told
John, I'm still curious. I'm curious. What is the emotion about? That's what I want to know. What's happening for you?
Gratitude today of being able to do what I dreamed.
Seeing that dream actually happening in front of you. Yeah. Awesome.
So, because I get to do that every day.
Awesome.
I was told I would never read. I've learned to read. Never write. I've written a lot of stuff. Said I would never mount anything.
Written 40 books. But I have to say, or more even.
Oh, way more than that. Yeah. That's just self-help books. But,
so John, I actually want to pause there for a moment for our story that I actually shared with you before we got on the call. And that is that what I remember from your talk when you came to South Africa and I came to hear you speak, I remember you saying the story about reading and how meaningful it was to you, and that you had read and you had counted how many books you had read by that point. And I'm sure today it's more. So how many books have you read by now?
I do keep record of it. It's 30,512 books now.
Unbelievable. And let me ask you, how do you keep record and why do you keep record?
I learned many years ago that anything that is really deeply meaningful to you, that's a pursuing goal that you're intending, to monitor the metrics and milestones along the way to assure that you're making progress on your goal.
Okay.
And so I kept records of, you're already listed on the podcast list. You're on, I keep records of every podcast, radio show, newspaper, magazine, book, movie. We've done 54 movies.
Wow.
Everything we do, I keep records of, because I want to see what's working and not working and refine what I'm doing to get the goals that I set out to that are meaningful. So I keep records of things.
Amazing. So the 30,000 books or so books that you have read are sitting on a list, and that helps you to continue to be inspired by reading and growing that list?
Yeah, and I also have a gratitude journal that I keep every day. It's 30 volumes, and
Wow.
some of the volumes are 900 pages, so it'll tell you how much there is there. I keep a record of all the things that happened in my day that I'm grateful for, that I intended, and things that just did occur that I didn't know was going to happen. And I was told by my mother, I was born on Thanksgiving Day in America, and my mom told me that if I am counting my blessings, I'm grateful for what I have, I get more to be grateful for, and I found that to be true. And it's also a way of confirming. I had an Indian mystic who had 6 PhDs. He was 35 years old. He was a brilliant Ramanujan type of guy that told me that never go to bed until you can look at your whole day and say thank you. And if there's anything in the day that you can't say thank you for, it will be baggage you'll carry forward. And if you can say thank you for it, it'll be fuel for greater opportunity. So I've been doing that since 23. I've been doing the gratitudes before that, but 23, I formalized it.
Started writing them down every single night.
Yeah, I do it. Well, sometimes during the day and then at night. So I don't go to bed without it. And if you saw the list, you would see that I'm serious about it. It's not just a occasional thing. Do
you look back at those lists? Do you revisit them?
Yeah, because what you do is you look at, that's a way of metricing what you say you want to do. So if I say I want to, consult for 1,000 major companies, here are the list. Yeah. If I say that I want to speak, I've been in 2,039 cities speaking, and I've been 154 countries speaking. So I keep records of that.
You count. Okay, so I have to say I'm an avid reader. I read a fortune. I've got bookshelves and bookshelves everywhere. And I haven't counted or kept a record, but I can totally relate to what you're saying about being so appreciative of the things that bring meaning to your life. And for me, books is definitely one of those things, because that's where the learning is. That's where the opening of perspective is. That's where, the growth, a lot of the growth is. So I can definitely.
Well, reading can be a distraction if you subordinate to an individual book and don't read the complementary opposite dialectic.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh, you are so right. Oh, and this is a topic so poignant for today, actually.
Because anytime you subordinate to one individual or even to a collective, you can infiltrate your own yearning and intrinsic drive and cloud the clarity of what you feel your mission is. So you read not with the idea that anybody's right. You read to extract things, to let what you know to be true, that you're building a foundation on, and you just keep adding to it. So that's a distinction. But yeah, because if you read one book on something, you'll get an opinion. If you read 100 books on a topic, you'll get a deeper understanding, because you'll get the complementation of opposites. You'll get the subjective biases woven together into something that's more serious.
And what you're saying, which I think is so important, what I'm hearing you say is that you need to look for those different perspectives. You need to delve deeply. And I think that is so lacking in today's world, because if you look at where people are mainly getting their reading material is often from their, whatever it is, it could be social media, or it could be the Google feed, whatever feed, news stream they are looking at. And we know that the algorithms work in such a way that they just give you more of what you're already reading. So if you really want to get a balanced perspective, you have to seek opposing views and opinions and perspectives. And I really fear that some of that is getting lost in where we are today.
Through the ages, since the time of Zeno, and all the way through even today, through Hegel and others, they had the dialectic. The dialectic was position, opposition, and proposition, anti-proposition. And the synthesis of that, Hegel considered some sort of a inspirational path. And I found that there is inside us a survival mechanism to avoid predator and seek prey. And so we have subjective biases and confirmation biases and disconfirmation biases to filter our reality into a false positive to make sure we're seeking prey and avoiding predator. Yeah. And so we don't realize that we're doing that, and what our opinions are just opinions sometimes, but we think they're facts. And being able to transcend the fiction to get to the facts, the real objective facts.
Music to my ears. You must have read Hans Rosling's Factfulness, all about biases.
I haven't read that one, but
you have to read it. You have to.
but the same thing is, it's just the scientific method was designed to try to help that, even though with scientific method, you still have biases. Just because a scientist has an opinion doesn't mean it's true. But at least it formalizes some sort of a step-by-step process that increases the probability of getting something that will last. So I'm a firm believer in studying. I made a goal when I was right at 18, to try to find the most universal principles that I could build a foundation of knowledge on. And I thought, first I made a list of every discipline known at the time. In the dictionary and encyclopedia, I went through and kind of got every discipline or ology you could study, chemistry and physics and mathematics. And I made a list of every known discipline at the time. And then I made a goal, because the average PhD read about 100 books in that area. And once they start doing secondary books and, you start, so I just made it a goal to read 100 books in each of the disciplines to find the most common principles that were stand within all of them, to try to find the most universal principles that I could build a body of knowledge on that I could teach. Now, I'm sure that infallibility is not probable, but at the same time, you try to build something that if 40 different industries point to the same law, same principle, and they're practically applicable, then you have a higher probability of having something that's sound. So I've tried to do that as my approach. And I'm sure that I have to refine my own illusions along the way.
Well, I'd love to hear. Share one of those universal principles, perhaps. Maybe something that can be helpful for the listeners as well to take away.
The first 10 years of my life, I thought being positive was the answer. Try to be positive, be up, be positive, everything else.
Yep.
And so I decided that's just a standard thing. Yeah. But I realized that that's an opium of the masses. That's an amygdala selling point as an opium process and not sustainable. So I realized I did a research project. I took 300 best-selling books in the area of positive thinking, Psycho-Cybernetics, The Magic of Thinking Big, When Friends Influence People, all the classical self-help books. And I went through it and I circled every positive word I could find in those books. And I extracted out 2,000 of those words. And then I put those on the top left corner of an index card and stacked them in 2 big boxes of index card boxes. And so I had the most positive words in the English language I could find. And then I meditated on each of those words for, 5 minutes, 10 minutes or whatever, and then contemplated on how could I use that word in the most positive statement, most positive affirmation or quotation I could think of. And so I made 2,000 of the most positive quotes and affirmations that I could say to myself as a human being. And then I compiled those alphabetically and divided them into 365 days. So there were 5 to 6 quotes per day, starting from January 1st to December 31st. And I published a book called 2,000 Quotes to the Wise, a day-by-day guide to inspirational living, which is still on the market if you see it out there. It was done in 1983. So I did this back when I was 28. Wow.
Yeah.
And this book was used in subliminal tapes in the self-help movement. We did three editions of that book. And then what I did is I created a day-by-day cycle forecasting form, which was a form that had 31 days across the top. And down the side, it had spiritual, mental, career, financial, family, social, and physical areas of life on the side. And across the top, I took each day and divided it into 4 quadrants, 7, 11, 3, and 7 chronologically. And then on the 7 areas, I put a +3, +2, +1, 0, -1, -2, -3 on each of the 7 areas. And what I did is I got up at 6:40. Well, I was up before that, but started at 6:45. I would memorize the 5 or 6 quotes for the day. I would chant them 108 times minimum, just like a rosary bead or a japa bead, like the Indian mystics or the Christian mystics. And I would affirm these affirmations into my consciousness, each of those 5 or 6 per day. So I was doing an average of 600, and really I did it more than that, 600 to 1,000 affirmations a day. And then what I did is I monitored with a beeper that would go off that I got from Target, a beeper that would go off every 4 hours. So at a 7, 11, 3, and 7, a beeper would go off, and then I would stop and ask how specifically do I feel in each of these 7 areas. So do I feel inspired or despired? Do I feel sharp or dull mentally? Do I feel, booming in business and in a successful or failure? Do I feel, socially extroverted or introverted? Do I feel financially abundant or lacking? And I monitored it on a +3 to -3 level every 4 hours. And I had this little beeper in my pocket and the form in my pocket, and I pull it out, and I would just be as honest as I could about how I felt in those 7 areas. And I monitored that. And I did that and did those affirmations for 24 months, 2 complete years.
Wow.
And monitored what impact it had on me and all the pluses and minuses that were there and the neutrals. And at the end of the 2 years on a Tuesday, I got a Texas Instruments calculator, and I calculated all the numbers, +3, -2, -1, +1, 0, whatever it was, and then added them up across the system. And believe it or not, when I added them up, the numbers, they came out 0 or 0.1, 0.2, this kind of thing. And so I realized that I had a built-in homeostat, kind of a psychostat, that was homing me back into a balanced state, because when I got puffed up, I tend to get narcissistic and think I was greater than others, and I would tend to project my values onto them and expect them to live in my values, which was futile. And when I was minimizing myself, I tend to inject other people's values I looked up to, and I was trying to live in their values, which is futile. But when I was centered, I tend to care enough about me and care enough about others to have a sustainable, fair exchange with equanimity and equity. And so I realized that nature was actually intending equanimity within us, authenticity within us, a central point instead of a proud point, which brought humbleness, or a minimized point, because in business, if you're proud and you're not listening to the customer's needs, you don't meet their needs and you go out of business or you get humbled. And if you're altruistically sacrificing your profits, you also don't have profits. So nature tries to make an equitable exchange. It's called equity theory. And I found that true inside the human psychology. And that was the research project that made me realize that I'm not promoting the hypocrisy of a one-sided monopole of positive thinking again. I'm going to tell people that we're here to be authentic and to love both sides of ourselves, not try to escape or try to rid ourselves of one side or condemn one side with our opposite proud side, but to love both sides. Because everybody wants to be loved for who they are, not for the facade that they have to put on. It's non-sustainable.
Amazing. So you're saying that we have our puffed up side. When things go great, we feel proud, we feel amazing, we feel on top of the world. We have our contracted side, which is when things don't go well, we tend to go into that beating ourselves up, self-doubt, misery, whatever it is. And our natural system is always aimed at bringing ourselves back into equilibrium. And that's what you call in your authentic central self. Is that what you call that? Okay.
Yeah. So many people think that success is the answer and pride is the answer.
Right. So success would be in that +3 category of puffing yourself up.
Yeah. Because what happens is Kia, who ran Coca-Cola Company, it was on the Berkshire Hathaway board, said, I'm leery of people who think they're successful. They have already depurposed themselves and are on the way down to lower priority things. And people that are feeling like they're failure, they sometimes are comparing their current reality to a fantasy of trying to be somebody they're not. And Einstein said, if you're a cat trying to swim like a fish, you're going to beat yourself up.
Yeah.
But if you honor who you are, the authentic you, you'll acknowledge yourself and be appreciative of yourself. So I gave up that fantasy side.
Notion of the be positive. I love what you're saying, because I come from a statistical background, and I remember that we learned about this concept of always regression to the mean, which means that even if you have super tall parents and the kids start being always taller than the parents, but at some point they're going to get shorter, because our natural way is always to regress to the mean, to create some kind of a balance.
We have a natural physiological efficiency, and that's where the mean is. If we get too tall, we tend to have kids that go the other direction.
Yes,
vice versa.
exactly.
Regression to the mean. See, I always say, Aristotle said this too, and he influenced a lot of spiritual movements, as you know. I mean, he had an influence on Islam and Christianity and even Judaism, later writings. And Aristotle said that the true virtue was between the two vices, and the two vices were the extremes of misperception. And so when we basically exaggerate ourselves or minimize ourselves, we're not being ourselves. But the true meaning was to be able to extract the mean out of our misperceptions.
Okay, so how do you explain it to someone who is, say, sitting on either end? Let's start maybe with someone who's really feeling depressed and anxious and self-doubt.
Well, they're feeling depressed because they're comparing their current reality to a fantasy about how it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Anytime you compare your current reality to what you think it should be, the way it is the way it is. The way it should be is something you concocted in your mind. And so anytime you compare your current reality to a fantasy about how it's supposed to be or how it used to be. I have people that were in COVID this last year, and they kept comparing their day to the way it used to be. And the way it used to be is not real. So they're going to be depressed.
So how do we create equilibrium or homeostasis, or how do we create that when we are feeling low energy or just this isn't how it used to be? I mean, this is really the space that we're in right now as a human species. It
has nothing to do with what goes on outside you. That's what people think. They think it's all about how the world's doing this to them. We have control over our perceptions, decisions, and actions in life. And if we prioritize our actions and stick to the highest priority things and learn to delegate lower priority things and do the highest priority things in a way that serves other people where we have fulfillment, that's the first thing that makes mastery. The second one is to take whatever happens in your life, no matter what it is, and ask how specifically is it helping me fulfill what's most meaningful to me. Wow. Because if you sit there and go, well, COVID's now causing me this problem, why not just ask this? What's currently reality? And how specifically is it helping me get where I want to go? And answer that question. And don't say, I don't know, and be a victim of history. Be a master of destiny and answer the question. Be accountable for the perception. Because it's your perception out there. You can make a heaven out of a hell or a hell of a heaven, as Milton said. It's up to us to determine that.
So if we get specific, like let's use an example, just because I think this is really fascinating and relevant to our time. So for example, someone wants to go and travel because they need a holiday. Okay, I can own that. I want to travel because I need a holiday and I can't because travel's closed and tourism's shut down and all of that.
Well, if you have an unrealistic expectation that's something that's not doable right now, you're going to be depressed.
So you're saying it's not doable, live with it,
face the reality.
Face the reality.
You got two choices. You can go get a private jet, pay $100,000 to go there, or you can get on Zoom or go on Google or whatever and look it up and go see what it's like on Zoom. But if you realize that the airlines are not open and you realize that you're not going to be able to travel, to have an expectation on something that can't be done is
just going to make you miserable. Right?
The misery has nothing to do with what's out there. It's your interpretation and your perception and decisions and actions. That's it. And we have control over that. I've taken people, see, if you're infatuated with something, you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides. You're blind to the downsides. We've all been infatuated with somebody and go, oh my God, this is my soulmate. We have the same number of eyes, same number of teeth. We're soulmates. That kind of thing. And then we're blind to the downside. Okay, well, that's our own misperception. It's nothing to do with them. It's not our perception.
Yeah.
And then we have resentment and we're conscious of the downside and unconscious of the upside. Our intuition is always trying to reveal to us the part that's unconscious to bring us back to the mean. That's the homeostat. That's the negative feedback system of intuition trying to guide us to see both sides. Now, if we ask questions to ourselves when we're infatuated, what are the downsides to that individual? And calm it down and bring it to the center, we've extracted meaning out of our misperception.
Okay, so let's stop there for a minute because I do want to, we spoke about the downside and the low energy and the depression. Let's talk about the success and the energy and euphoria and sense of achievement and fulfillment that comes with being successful and achieving what you want. And I think a lot of people have this.
That's blindness. Success is a blindness. I don't even pursue success. I tossed that out when I was 30. I have no interest in success or failure. I'm interested in being a man on a mission.
Okay. What's your mission?
Different. A mission is to research the greatest teachings on the earth from the greatest minds that lived in all the different fields and share a culmination of that information with people to help them live more fulfilled lives. That's it. So success assumes that you have arrived at something and you're done. I'm successful. Success is a misnomer that's actually a pride that makes you blind to what you're overlooking that you're not doing in your life. So I don't promote success constructs. I don't promote failure constructs. I promote feedback constructs. Because what's been shown when you're living in your executive center and you're living more objectively, you see both sides as feedback. Because the second you think you're successful, you start puffing yourself up. You start to think, well, you're successful and they're not. And then the second you think you're failure, you beat yourself down. So I'm not interested in facades. I'm interested in authentic state where you're grateful and you realize that you wouldn't be there if it wasn't for other people, and you're overlooking their contribution to you when you think you've arrived. That means you have a small vision and you've got little experience to think that you've arrived to success. When people say,
can
well,
I ask you there, just so that we make it more real, like with an example, and I'm thinking about what you shared about having this amazing vision of speaking in front of thousands of people or even 1 million people, and that this vision has come about for you and this is the life that you're living.
Well, like I said,
is that not success?
Am I ever done with that?
Okay, it doesn't mean that you're done, but you're living in a state of really living out your mission. You've set certain goals for yourself, and the way I see it, you've definitely are achieving them. You have achieved them. You're continuing to live it.
I have something. Seneca, the poet, Roman poet, he said, you measure an individual by their most distant ends. So if your end is immediate gratification, you arrive. If your end is beyond your life and it's a contribution, you work on it every day. I don't see myself as success. I see myself a man on a mission. Other people can label me all kinds of things. People that have similar values and they look in what they do and what I do and it matches their values, they think he's successful and he's determined. Somebody has a completely different set of values, sees he's pig-headed, he's rigid, he's not doing what we think is important. Those are all labels and opinions that people have.
Right.
And opinions are the cheapest commodities on earth. That which circulates the most has the least value. I'm interested in fulfilling a mission that's deeply meaningful that I can do that has no end to it. That is a contribution. Hopefully on the last day of my life, I'm still working on it. Mm. So I don't ever think of arrival. I think of, the journey. And because sometimes we think, I've seen people that arrive, reach a point of certain economics, reach a point where they retire from the thing, and then they decay because they thought they've successful. And then they're living on the past. Today is what matters. And right now, what can you do to be of contribution today? Not to be distracted by what you already achieved necessarily. I document those as a refinement mechanism. And to be grateful for the opportunity, but not to go, that's it, I'm successful.
I get that. I totally get that. It's not like a checklist where you tick it off, mark it off, and it's done. And I totally get what you're saying, because then what? Then what? I actually often think about these celebrities who've hit some kind of a peak at the age of 21, and then you think like, okay, so what's next for you? Where are you going with this?
Let me give you an example. I was standing in 1983, November 1983. I was in New York at the Marriott Marquis. I was standing on some steps, getting ready to go backstage on some steps, getting ready to go up on stage. There were 6 of us about to do a 20-minute presentation for 2 hours. We had a slot to 5,000 doctors. And I was one of the speakers that day. This is back in 1983. And the guy that was sitting in front of me, his name was Zev. He said to me as he was right before me, he was about to speak. And the guy was coming down and he was getting ready to go up. He said, wish me luck. He said, this is the day I've been waiting for since I was a child. My father spoke on this stage. I'm now finally arrived. I'm finally successful. And he went up there, and it was his peak moment. And his presentation, because it was peak and he was excited, he wasn't present with the audience, and it was a letdown. And I thought, what an interesting perception. In my mind, I thought, I want to do this at least 50,000 times in my life. This is just the beginning. I saw this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. It's not something I've arrived to. And I saw that. Now I've spoken on speeches, thousands of people now. But I didn't see it as success. He saw it as success, and he disappeared. I've never seen him since.
He saw it as the pinnacle. So here's the question that I have for you. You've stood on those stages. You are living your vision that you saw all that time ago. And for me, the question is, if we're looking at that, what you described of how you're feeling, the -3 to +3.
Grateful.
Okay, so is that at 0? Is that at that homeostasis?
Yes. Why? Because when you're proud or ashamed, you're not in a state of grace and gratitude for the
what
magnificence.
Happy, fulfilled. That's got to be more than a 0. It's a +1, +2. I don't know.
No. Joy and sorrow, happy and sad, are polarized emotions of the amygdala. Grace, where you have tears of gratitude, like we had a while ago, for the opportunity to fulfill your mission. That's a different state. If I've taken people, I teach a program called the Breakthrough Experience. I've taught it 1,122 times. I keep records. And
you are incredibly disciplined, right? I mean,
no, I do it spontaneously. Other people label it discipline when they have a different set of values. But what happens is I've kept record of this. And in that program, I have demonstrated a state of grace where they see both sides and see the hidden order of both sides, where they realize that their mother was challenging, their father supported, or the people at the school were giving them a hard time and their parents were supporting them. And they see the pairs of opposites. So they realize that nature is sort of helping them, just like their physiology, their psychology, their sociology is helping them be authentic. And realizing that the world is trying to help you become authentic. So if you get cocky, you get humbled by people. You get humbled, they lift you up. Nature's trying to just get you authentic. That's the nature of life on the planet. This is negentropy, as Erwin Schrödinger just called it. When we finally realize that, we realize that if we actually are happy, we're blind to the downsides, and we're sad, we're blind to the upsides. But when we're in a state of tears of gratitude, we're seeing both sides. And St. Augustine, the theologian, said, when the will of man matches the will of God, if you will, it's a theological construct he was in. We just call it equanimity or equilibrium in physics. But from a theological perspective, then you have a state of grace. And grace is gracious. It's a state where you see the hidden order in the chaos, and you're not fooled by the positives outweighing the negatives or the negatives outweighing the positives. Because if I went to you, Daphne, if I went to you and I said, you're always positive, you're never negative, you're always kind, you're never cruel, you're always giving, you're never taking, you're always generous, never stingy, always positive, never negative, always peaceful, never wrathful, your own BS meter inside would go, no. You'd immediately think with your intuition of times when you really slammed your husband or something, you know? And if I went to you and I said, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, and I said the opposite, your BS meter go, no, I've got nice times. But if I said to you, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, sometimes you're peaceful, sometimes you're wrathful, you would immediately go, that's true. You only have certainty when you embrace both sides. Wilhelm Wundt, one of the earliest psychologists, one of the kind of founders of psychology, said that there were two types of contrast, the law of contrast, simultaneous contrast and sequential contrast. Simultaneous contrast is when you're fully aware, you have full mindfulness, and you see both sides of an event, and you handle paradoxes as leaders have to face, and they can see them both sides and not react to either. That's a simultaneous contrast. And then there's sequential contrast where you see the person nice, and then a day later they see a mean, and you put them together and you realize that they're neither of those. Those are personas in mass that they facadely wear for a moment. But the actual essence of their being is the balance of those two. When I see something that I see one side of, I know I'm blinded to the downsides. And we get sidetracked for that, and it sells as opium, and it's been sold in the marketplace that we want to be one-sided. But Aristotle warned against the hedonistic pursuit of a one-sided form of happiness. He said there's an eudaimonia, which is a wellness factor, which is a resilient, stressful factor in the center that's way more profound than happiness. And in the breakthrough experience, I've proven to thousands of people, 100,000 people, that if they have a choice between this superficial happy moment where they're elated and blinded like an infatuation versus a deep meaning of grace with tears of gratitude, that one is deeply meaningful because it's the mean. And that one is more profound and more authentic than the momentary transient high that they get from a dopamine rush in the amygdala. So I don't pursue that. I stopped that when I was 30, and most people are addicted to that, and their life is bipolar because of it. And bipolar condition is the byproduct of an addiction to a one-sided fantasy.
So I'm curious to hear, what is your interpretation of where we are in the world today? Because we are seeing a huge amount of chaos. We are seeing a huge amount of need to control and make it all okay. So I'm kind of interpreting it based on what you're saying to striving for the polarity of everything's okay, we want to be happy, we want to be healthy, in the midst of this chaos that is not allowing for that at all.
All perceptual. It's all perceptual.
Yeah,
Here's what I mean.
Yeah.
There's a law called the law of heuristic escalation, which is part of chaos theory. This law states that the second you try to bring order onto something based on an opinion that's subjectively biased, you create an equal and opposite bias to counterbalance it, to bring it back into equilibrium. It's a homeostat. So we'll use Trump as an example. Trump tried to put a wall up right across Mexico. And during the time he tried to put a wall up, the largest number of migrants from Central America and Mexico tried to get against the wall to counterbalance it. Okay. And then the second Biden comes in there and he takes away the wall kind of thing and lets people all in, then the resistance of saying we can't let all these people in starts now manifesting. So, and then if you're anti-gun, you create gun promoters, and you get anti-abortions, you get abortion promoters. Pairs of opposites. Heraclitus in the 6th century, 5th century BC talked about these unity of complementations of opposites. This is what's real out there. But people, what they do is they get subjectively biased and blind, and they see one side, they take that as truth, and then the equal and opposite side comes in to counterbalance it to get it back in each. Right. And the definition of chaos, the definition of entropy is missing information. It's the unconscious. So when we're thinking, oh my God, this terrible thing is occurring, we're unconscious of the benefits at the time. Oh, this great thing is happening. We're unconscious of the downside. If you see both sides, you're centered and you're grateful because you see nature doing its job. So the chaos.
As you said, see both sides and try not to react to either.
I had, when COVID came out last March, I just flew in from Tokyo. I was filming a movie there and also doing the breakthrough experience there. I flew into Los Angeles. I got into Los Angeles. I was scheduled to do a talk on evening Wednesday. I came in on Monday night. We shut down and made it where you can't do seminars on Tuesday, day before. So we went online. So Wednesday we went online. By the weekend, we had a viable seminar online, and we went and started doing it. So I went online. In 1 week, we started to go online and change my entire thing. I canceled 20 cities around the world, tours, and went online. Okay, now, I sent out a message to my students around the world and to millions of people. And I said, I want everybody to sit down right now, and whatever you're perceiving, I want you to find its opposite and find the benefits of what's happening here, to center yourself so you're not letting the world around you react. You're letting the voice and the vision on the inside guide your life. I got 17,000 benefits of what's happening ongoing coming in. And so I started reading them out to my students to help them realize that if you're seeing a crisis, it's only because you're choosing to see one side and not seeing both sides. If you see that it's helping you technologically, it's helping you get close to your family, it's helping you find out you don't have to drive as much, it's helping you start seeing it, you're cleaning the air. You know, as you start looking at the upsides, you center yourself, and then you go, okay, now my current reality is this. How specifically do I take this current reality, and now how do I fulfill my mission with it? That's being resourceful. And then when you realize that, you realize that I've now got resourcefulness, and this is a catalyst for me to go do something even more amazing in my life. It's not a crisis unless I choose to see only missing information, the side that I'm ignoring. So when I see both sides, I'm centered again. And this is where my authentic self comes to it. And that's where we go back to the executive center. That's where we get creative and innovative. And that's where we come up with solution orientation instead of problem exaggeration.
Great. So let's make this practical. For people listening and really getting this concept, because I love it. I'm finding this really inspiring and very, very clever as well. What is a practice that we can take on to really internalize what you're saying? So instead of, okay, I can see this logically makes sense. How do I start living it? How do I start internalizing it?
Well, first thing, I tell people that every human being has a set of priorities in life, set of values, and it's unique, fingerprint specific. They have all different vantage points, different values as a result of the different voids that they have in their life. Finding out what they value most, whatever's highest on their list of values, is where they spontaneously are inspired, intrinsically driven to do something that's deeply meaningful. Because anything that's low on your values, you're going to need motivation to do. Anything that's high on your values, you're going to intrinsically be driven to do. You're going to excel in your highest values. You're not going to excel in your lowest. If you need reward to do it or punishment to not do it, it's not really meaningful to you. And most people live by motivation, which is a symptom, instead of inspiration, which is a cause. So if you go and prioritize your life and live by highest priority things and identify what your highest values really are, which on my website, drdemartini.com, I have a complimentary free thing they can do. It's private. Nobody will ever see it except them. It's 30 minutes of their time to go through and ask 13 questions to your life to help you really define what it is you're really committed to. What do you spontaneously do that nobody has to remind you to do, that's not a should, not an ought to, not a supposed to, not a got to, not a have to, not a must, not a need to, from any extrinsic individual or collective authority, but what's really intrinsically calling you to do something that contributes to the planet. Finding out what that is and structuring your life and prioritizing your life along that is what activates the leader inside. Because the leader's sitting in all of us. It's just dormant. It's not emerging because of subordination and conformity to external sources of motivation. Instead of letting the voice and the vision on the inside be louder than all those opinions on the outside. Finding out what that is, it's intrinsically, it's a natural gift. As Einstein said, that's the key to waking up a genius in children and also in leaders. Finding that out is one. Then once you define that, prioritizing your actions, because you have control over perception, decisions, and actions. If you prioritize your actions, you're doing the most you can do in any moment in your life. Then take the perceptions, no matter what they are, no matter what's happening in the world around you, center it. So if you're elated, you're blind to the upsides. If you're depressed, you're blind to the upsides. Ask questions that your intuition is yearning to express, to balance it out, to find the mean in it, and watch what happens. I've been doing this for years. And so if all of a sudden you're infatuated, you're highly infatuous with somebody, would you believe you're blinded to the downsides? You're going to discover them over the next few weeks. And then you find it out. So why have the wisdom of the ages with the aging process? You can have the wisdom without it by asking the questions right on the moment you feel that. Those feelings are not something to be lost in. Those feelings are feedback to let you know you're blind to some half of this. And then when you feel kind of down, it's because you're not looking at the upsides. So asking quality questions to neutralize and balance out your mind, to recenter yourself, to extract meaning out of your existential existence, and allow yourself to get graced again, to see the order of there, and allow you to go back to what's priority, where you're really objective. That's a daily ritual that if a person does that, their lives transform and they become a leader.
I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, because you're not
I've been doing that for a long time. It really helps. I've helped thousands of people do that, and it's changed them and stabilized people that even have bipolar condition and depression and all that stuff that are delusions. Depressions are not a biochemical imbalance. That's not a causal thing. That's a correlated thing. People go around and they blame it, and then the pharmaceutical industries make them addicted. I've taken people, hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people that have been claimed to be bipolar and claimed to be this, and showed them how to set realistic expectations that are congruent, and their physiology rallies and their brain remyelinates, and it's on its way again. Wow. So we don't want to give power to delusions. We want to, as Paul Dirac, the Nobel Prize winner, said, it's not that we don't know so much. We know so much that isn't so. We're taught a lot of BS. And it's time to get grounded in what's actual in life if you really want to master your life. Awesome.
So first thing is really do the questioning around what is meaningful for you. What are your highest priority values? And you've got, we'll put it in the show notes as well, the link to actually go and do that exercise and answer those questions. And then it's a daily practice of looking at the state that you're in and actually using your emotions as feedback to say, what am I missing? Because if you're inordinately happy, then what am I not seeing in this picture? And if you're inordinately sad, what am I not seeing in this picture?
If you go to your life and take every tragic moment in your life where you had a tragic accident, I guarantee you were puffed up, manic, elated, or cocky at the time it occurred.
Really? Do you think so? Do you really think so?
I've had thousands of people demonstrate that over and over in the seminars. And what people are doing is they think it's a random event because they don't know how to ask the right questions.
Wow.
Boltzmann, the physicist, said that what we claim to be random in stochastic probabilistic thinking may be a hidden order that we haven't discovered yet. Einstein felt the same way. Leibniz felt the same way. The algorithms haven't allowed us to see the order of what's happening in life. So what we think is random may be missing information. And if we ask the right questions and we become aware of the information, we actually realize that it's a mechanism to guide us to authenticity. Everything is trying to guide us to authenticity.
Beautiful.
Feedback.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Everything is feedback to guide us back to authenticity.
Authenticity. To what's really deeply meaningful. I call it unconscious motives. People, we all have unconscious motives. See, when we're infatuated with something and blind to the downsides, we get enamored. We get this dopamine rush. We get, wow.
But those dopamine rushes are really fun. They really are fun.
No, they're not, because what they're doing is they're blinding you. They're blinding you to what's going on that you're overlooking.
Okay, can we not just be for a few minutes in this elated sense of fun and joy? Is that not okay?
Sure. But we think, listen, anytime we have a lopsided perception, that gets stored in our subconscious mind as electronic charge. It facilitates with glutamate and it inhibits with GABA in the transmitters in the brain, and it's stored in the brain as electronic charge. And we create anti-memories in the brain to try to neutralize that as a homeostatic mechanism in the brain. So our brain, when we're actually under this illusion and elation, is actually causing damage to the brain. People don't realize that. And the same thing for depression. Both of those are incomplete awarenesses. So I have no interest in that. When I just got through saying that if I have deep meaning and I have fulfillment, that is way more profound than the elation of happiness and sadness. So people get addicted to that. And the moment they get addicted to that, they wake up their nucleus accumbens, which is the impulse center inside themselves, and they get addicted. I want that again. I want that again. And that's what the source of their depressions are.
Okay. So I get that. And that deep sense of grace and emotion and feeling of gratitude is awesome. And I don't know, do you have a sense of how many people actually get to experience that?
Well, they're moving back and forth, swinging back and forth in bipolar condition and missing out on the magnificence of the center.
The magnificence of the center. I love that, because there's magnificence in the center. And maybe we're trained, and even I, as I'm asking you questions, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, because the center feels so neutral, like not here or there.
No.
But there's magnificence in the center, and I love that.
The magnificence of the center. I mean, I've demonstrated this 100,000 people in Breakthrough and given them the experience. When you're elated, you're blind to the downsides. When you're depressed, you're blind to the upsides. When you're centered, you see both sides.
You see both.
When you see both sides, you realize that there is an inherent, natural homeostat mechanism in your physiology, psychology, sociology, and the world around you. When you do, you feel a grace, because you feel that there's an intelligence, you might say, of the universe working to help you master your life. See, if you get elated, you're blind. You're not as effective, believe it or not. When people are blind and elated, they're not as effective as they are when they're grounded and centered. Same thing when you're in sports. If you're elated and think, well, I'm already won, that's when you end up fluffing up the system. I walked with Tiger Woods at the British Open. We were walking together in one of the holes. And as we were doing that, he had a caddy. If he shot off the green and off to the rough, the caddy said, this is when you excel. And if he shot it right down the center, and he said, we still got 12 holes to go. So he was neutralizing any elation, and he was lifting any depression, and they were both doing that in order to maintain their center. If you're doing trades and economics and you make a big killing, you lose your center, and then you end up flubbing it. And if you go down, you then feel frightened, and you let your emotions. Warren Buffett says, don't expect to ever manage money until you can manage your emotions. Same with Robert Greene. So the amygdala is the emotion center, the desire center that's trying to avoid pain and seek pleasure, and it's all polarizing us. The executive center is governing that and mitigating that and dampening those polarities like a governor to knock down those polarities that make us skew our perceptions. It's not that we're not going to feel. We're going to feel grateful. We're going to feel love, not romantic highs and fantasies of dopamine, but real love. We're going to feel inspired. We're going to feel enthused. And we're going to feel certain, and we're going to feel present. And those outweigh any momentary happy, glee, little fantasy states that people get addicted to. Because those moments of highs, I saw a woman that had a moment, she was infatuated with a guy. She had this fantasy of this guy she created. She wanted to have babies and picket fences and stuff like that, right? And then he ended up leaving. So she was down. Because we only fear the loss of that which we infatuate with. We only fear the gain of that which we resent. If we're in the center, we have natural resilience and adaptability to an eternally changing world. So if we're basically highly polarized and absolute in our thinking process and absolute in our moral processes, we have the most conflict, most phobias, most fantasies, and we're not stable. And that's where all the instabilities in our societies are. The people that are extremely subjectively biased on one side or the other, thinking they're right and thinking that would make everything happy or that would be bad if it's like those people, those are the sources of all the conflicts in the world. So I'm absolutely certain that the person who has the center and who is truly grateful, they don't lose feelings. They transform polarized feelings into a synthesis, which has been through the ages by the greatest minds known to be the key to a fulfilled life.
So I'm curious if there's anyone that you know today living that kind of life, besides for you, of course. Any other people?
All of us are living gradations of it. All of us are doing gradations of it, and we're either doing it over time, back and forth, ups and downs, neutralizing. When the more polarized it is, the more unstable we are. And some people are more governed than others. When you live by your highest values and you live congruently and you awaken the blood, glucose, and oxygen into the forebrain, you have the governing center, the executive center govern that, and you're more stable and you're more appreciative. Are there people like that? Absolutely. In various fields, I meet them. Majority of people, are sitting in vicissitudes looking for a fix. They're looking for an opium fix.
Yeah, true.
And what's interesting is, as one scholar in Catholicism said, and this is just going to confront it, that sometimes they sell the opium to the masses because the animal nature within us, not our angelic nature inside us, but our animal nature inside us wants the quick fix. And so it's sold to them. And just because it's sold to them doesn't mean it's truth. What sells to the masses is not necessarily the truth. What's the true is in the hands of the hearts of the real masters. Yeah. And that's the people we want to go and learn from. The people that have mastered their lives and empowered their lives and are not caught in vicissitudes of misperception and subjective bias and polarizations. In America right now, we've got this highly polarized state, the Democrats, Republicans, and they're both thinking they're right and stuff. The wise individual sees that both of them have something to contribute, and we need to learn from both. That there's some wisdom sitting in this side, there's wisdom in this side. You put the two together, you get a wise action.
And not to bring politics into it, but Israel has now had its 4th election because we just cannot get into any agreement.
Well, I just got asked this last week, by Women's Wage for Peace. It's an organization there in Israel, to ask to be one of the key speakers in the 2022 World Peace Day. I'm going to be one of the speakers introducing this principle to Israeli and Palestinian people. So we've already been doing it, but this is something we're going to be doing on that day.
Yep. Awesome.
What happens
I hope to see you here when you come.
Well, the second you try to make yourself right with pride, you're on your way down.
Yeah.
Pride before the fall. We're not here for pride. We're not here for one-sidedness. We're here to embrace two sides of life. How are you going to love yourself if you're trying to get rid of half of yourself? How are you going to love your neighbor if you're trying to get rid of half your neighbor? How are you going to love the world if you're trying to get rid of half the world? You have to embrace both sides.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I think you've given us a lot to think about and a lot to work with. And some parting thoughts, some parting words. Anything you want to share before we close?
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on your show. Thank you. I tell people that the magnificence of who they are is far greater than any fantasies they'll ever put on themselves.
That is fabulous. That is absolutely fabulous. If we can connect to the magnificence of who we are and not project into what we wish for or what we see in others that we want to emulate. Absolutely.
A real objective is not a fantasy. It has both sides. That's why the Stoics and Marcus Aurelius used to do meditating on the so-called evils, the downside, so you're prepared for reality. You don't go to space fantasizing about one side. You go there knowing everything that could go wrong and how do you prepare for it and prepare. If we put people on pedestals, we'll minimize ourselves. If we put people in pits, we'll exaggerate ourselves. If we minimize or exaggerate ourselves, we're not ourselves. And if we're not ourselves and we're infatuated with them or resentful to them, we're not honoring them for themselves. We're seeing only half of them. But when we actually see them and honor them by seeing both sides of them and realize they're both hero and villain and saint and sinner and virtue and vice and all pairs of opposites, we can do the same within ourselves. When we do, our authentic self can come to the surface. And when we do, we set real goals in real time. Because if we puff ourselves up, we'll set too big a goal in too short a time frame. If we minimize ourselves, we'll set too small a goal in too long a time frame, only to give us feedback to set real goals in real time frames that are true objectives, that are deeply meaningful, which is inspiring and then exemplifying as a leader to do something extraordinary on the planet that contributes equally to other people. That is what we're capable of doing. That's what I love helping people do, because there's meaning, fulfillment, and inspiration in a life that way. It's not a quiet life of desperation. It's a life of inspiration.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I think that just to kind of sharpen the leadership message there is that as leaders, it's really all about that all the time, because we are seeing both sides constantly. And I guess what's coming up for me is, instead of always wanting to fix it and make it right and make it happy and make it perform or whatever it is, it's about being able to see both and not get triggered by either.
That's it. Because, as Deming said, Edward Deming, he says, if you see overworkers and you get elated with them, you'll breed the underworkers to counterbalance it, the pair of opposites.
Yeah.
But if you can see that the overworker is undermining the teams and the underworkers are building the teams, and you can then redirect and show the pains and pleasures to both, you can center that by your own perceptions. But if you infatuate the one, you'll breed the other to teach you the lesson of life. Because that which you seek and infatuate with, you draw into your life the opposite to break that addiction to the fantasy of one-sidedness. So I'm a firm believer in embracing ourselves whole. We call it mindfulness in the Buddhist traditions, mindful. How are you going to be mindful if you're only seeing one side?
Yeah. Mindful is being present to what is.
What is, both sides.
Both sides, yeah. And noticing, not necessarily doing anything, just noticing.
When you see the hidden order, you transform people. A person who's really present has a powerful presence that leads people by example. Einstein said the greatest teacher is exemplification. Master your life, you lead people. Because every human being innately yearns to be authentic, to be loved for who they are, for both sides, and to be able to express that freely without constraint.
So where does the decision come from? So you're seeing both sides, you're seeing the contrast, you're able to hold that, and what happens next?
Decisions come from a skewed view of avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. An act of love is a spontaneous act that's wise when you see both sides. I've demonstrated that over and over and over in the breakthrough. When we get people into perfect center, they have a tear of gratitude, and then they embrace somebody and they do an act of love. And it's a spontaneous act. It's not because they think there's going to be more advantage and disadvantage. That's a decision.
What is the spontaneous act that comes
Spontaneous
out of
act that inspires somebody that they know fulfills what's deeply meaningful in themselves and the people they care about. That's equanimity and equity.
And it makes me think that through our need to control, through our need to want a certain outcome, we've even lost the ability for spontaneous action.
That's it. And what happens is that most of those are because of fear.
Yes.
See, we have fear of loss of that which we seek and fear of gain of that which we try to avoid.
Because we're trying to put it into our frameworks or into our what we know. But we don't always know everything.
Where we're not aware. The majority of people on the planet don't really pursue an actualized life. They're surviving. And the amygdala is a survival center. Now, it doesn't mean they have to. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've come from. It doesn't matter what you've been through. What matters is if you start applying principles that have stood the test of time, you end up standing the test of time.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. I think that was certainly inspiring for me. You've really made me think a lot, actually, about a lot of questions that I've been sitting with, again, considering the time that we're in that feels incredibly chaotic, with a lot of, push to certain polarizations, which is often very uncomfortable for me. So just has given me a very much a sense of just being centered. So I really want to thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you.
Okay.
This wraps up another episode of Leadership Live. Thank you for joining us today. And now let's continue the conversation. Do you have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Connect with me on LinkedIn Or head on to my website at daphnahorovitz.com, where you can download a free sample of my new book, Weekly Habits for Extraordinary Leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend so that I can continue to reach and support leaders just like you. So tune in next week to Leadership Live, where talented people become extraordinary leaders.